Welcome to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary. In this episode's Uniontown segment, WGA West member Jazz Peck talks with American Federation of Musicians local president Stephanie O'Keefe about representing musicians in the industry, AFM's new agreement with the AMPTP, the power of solidarity, and the magic that both musicians and writers create with their work. Next up, WGA West member Aaron Fullerton talks with A Murder at the End of the World co-creator, showrunner, writer, and co-star Brit Marling about telling stories that blend real emotions with big ideas, the unique pitching process she has with her writing partner, and more. Listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. And now, Jazz Peck's conversation with the AFM Local 47 President, Stephanie O'Keefe. Please note that this interview was taped before contract ratification.
I'm very excited to be here with Stephanie O'Keefe, the president of American Federation of Musicians Local 47, which recently had contract negotiations with the AMPTP and currently has a tentative agreement out for ratification right now. Welcome, Stephanie. How are you?
Thank you. I'm just fine. I'm having a wonderful time already, and we just got started.
I know. We already had a wonderful conversation. Y'all should check the extras for that.
Yeah, you guys actually missed the fun.
Yeah. But tell the people about yourself, your work, how you got into work with AFM.
Well, I'm originally from Chicago. I played my first AFM job when I was 13 in, of all places, Las Vegas, where I had a relative who was conducting an orchestra and asked me to come out and play. And 9 years later, I moved to Las Vegas and started playing almost immediately in the showroom orchestras, and I played there for 11 years, and I got to do all kinds of really fun stuff for great acts. You know, I was there for the first time that Dolly Parton ever played in Las Vegas. I was in the orchestra.
That's
I played
awesome.
for Frank Sinatra. I played for the reopening of the MGM after they'd had a fire, which had closed it down, and they reopened with this big extravaganza with Sammy Davis and Jerry Lewis. So I was very fortunate to be there at that time. But there was always this pull to this magical place, Los Angeles, and every year somebody would move to LA. And I would hear these stories, and it was kind of like Oz. And I thought, someday I want to go there. I want to be a musician in Los Angeles. So eventually one day I packed up, sort of like the Beverly Hillbillies. I packed up everything in the car, and I moved to L.A., and I transferred my membership, or actually I didn't transfer my membership. I outright joined Local 47.
Okay.
And I started freelancing here.
Did you know what the AFM was? How did you find out what the
American
Federation of Musicians
I was already
is?
a member. I actually joined the AFM in college at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana when my then instructor said, I have a job for you. It was a local orchestra, but you need to go join the Musicians Union.
Mm-hmm.
And I played that one job. So the first job I played when I was 13, I was not a member. This job I played when I was probably 18. I was a member. And years later, when I went to move to Las Vegas and they said, you're going to have to be in the union, I found out that my mother had a feeling, and all the years in between, that the renewal notices had come to my parents' house, and my mother had been paying my union dues.
Oh.
And I didn't know this.
Okay.
And she said later, I don't know, I just had a feeling. So when I went to move to Las Vegas, when I think I was 21, I was a member because I had been a member all along and didn't even know it all through school.
In terms of the AFM today, what are some of the key things that are facing the community of musicians?
Well, one of the things that just really annoys me is that the product that we create, just like the product you create, is so valuable. It's everywhere. People can't go 5 seconds without hearing music. And this really was driven home to me when, I may not look like it, but I was a member of a gym, and I was in the gym,
Slander.
and I looked around, and everyone in this huge room full of machines was wearing headphones, listening to music, except me, the one, probably the only professional musician. And I thought, man, these people cannot go any length of time without what we do. But when you talk to them about the people who make this product, they're not too sure that, they're not too sure. Well, we have to pay you, or we have to pay for your product, or we can't just get it for free. We can't download it for free. So you have this really strange contradiction where the product is, so valuable they can't live without it, but the people who make the product are just going to kick to the curb. And that's really what kind of inflames me as a president.
Yeah. We live in a culture that really loves music and essentializes it a little bit down to celebrity, and so people are able to identify these large scale music artists that are able to operate without the same sort of need or accountability to the public. And then we forget the journeymen, the workmen that build up and create and facilitate every small individual part of what goes into a song.
But even some of the big names have their music stolen on a
true.
regular basis, or used, say for political parties they don't support.
Right.
But one of the things that I think is funny is that our product is so valuable that they make radios that with suction cups that you can put on your shower wall.
Right.
Because God forbid you'd have to take a shower and go 7 minutes without music. And then you're going to sit across the table from me and tell me that what we do is not essential.
Right.
I mean, I just laugh.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to think about is, and I remind myself of, is that to the best of my knowledge and research, there's not a single culture on planet Earth that has ever been found has music, has dance, has storytelling, has art. And this is not a luxury item, what we all do here together. This is like food, water, art, air, sleep, whatever are the other essentials. But there is no culture that doesn't fashion instruments, that doesn't have drama. I was talking the other day to an employer who does presents concerts that also sometimes have drama, and we were talking about at least, probably more, but 3,000 years ago, people were buying tickets and going to the theater. This is being human, is making art.
Right.
This isn't some fancy thing. This isn't a car with wing doors, and you say, oh, well, that's a luxury. No, this is essential to being human.
Yeah. And with all of that in mind, thousands of years of tradition, it being a human necessity, and your own personal experience as a professional musician who comes into being a president at AFM, how did you enter into negotiations in January, and what were you up against?
You're up against people who want to make money in any industry. Let's just lay the groundwork here. In any industry in a capitalist society, you're up against people who are making money from the labor of other people. That's the name of the game. So you have to find a way to work with these. You're not going to overthrow the economic system across the table. So you're going to create an agreement that works for everyone. You have to. You're going to obviously have things that are deal breakers. We can't do this. We could look at this, and the other side of the table is running numbers in their head and saying, we can't do this. We can do this. We knew that we needed and must have a streaming residual. We could no longer go any longer with that because the business model is changing so quickly. It's changing while we sit here. And we absolutely had to have a streaming residual. That was really maybe the most important thing. And we got it. And I was part of the negotiation. Of course, I was not the chief negotiator. That was our international president, Tino Gagliardi, who was, in my opinion, absolutely phenomenal at the table and a phenomenal leader. We're so very, very lucky to have him. And we were able to reach an agreement that they say a good agreement is either when nobody gets everything they want or when each side thinks they got a great deal.
Right.
Pick one. And I think that everybody was pretty happy.
Okay, that's excellent. Talk to me about that first day. I was there very briefly at the rally in the rain, where everyone was like huddled under the little awnings and they kept shooing us out from under them.
The first day, it was a lot of, how are we going to do this?
Mhm.
We're going to all sit here. We're going to present our proposals. Where is this going to go? I think there was a lot of concern that it would take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
There was concern, like, would we end up on the street? What would that be like? But we knew from the beginning that there is a change in this city.
Mm-hmm.
And what the change in this city is that the people who create these phenomenal products are all talking to each other. We are making the greatest American product that is currently being manufactured, and we're making it together. And we're starting to come together. And now you have the other side of the table who funds that creation
Mm-hmm.
and markets that creation. But they're no longer dealing just with this person here who never talks to this person here. We had at the table on that first day
Mm-hmm.
representatives from other unions, and that was a game changer. But it should be that way. What we make together is the difference in many people's lives. The art that is created in this city is so vital to human life on this planet at this time. And you go all around the world, and what you see is American film and television. The world's appetite for what this city creates is insatiable. And so in that sense, we're the creators. We have the power. With all due respect, and there were people across the table that I would consider friends of mine, but not one of them can write a script, not one of them can compose a film score, not one of them can act in a film, not one of them can build or design and build a set, not one of them can play concertmaster on a big film score. So we're in a very unique position. You look at a law firm. The senior partners have been associates. They've come up the ladder. But in our case, the producer comes into a scoring stage. They can't play any of those instruments. They can't write that music. They are completely dependent upon us to score the film. They're completely dependent on you to write the script for the film. They don't know how to do that. So imagine running a company where you're selling the products of people and you couldn't live long enough to learn how to do those jobs. That is our power.
Yeah, there's like you've highlighted a couple things here that I think are really fascinating. And one is like something that sort of connects our conversation back to our strike effort last year, the WGA strike effort, is this growing sentiment of workers understanding that they are being exploited by the people at the top. That we do have the power, and that the industry and so many industries rely and depend on the involvement of the worker, and that if we stand together shoulder to shoulder, then there's nothing that we can't achieve against
Absolutely.
these entities that seek to serve capitalist interests and serve their bottom line over the people that make the things happen.
Absolutely. I had a negotiation recently. And, I say this with love. Some of my best friends are lawyers. But there was this lawyer across the table that was just a drag, And he was being a drag. He was not only being a drag to me, he was being a drag to the union's lawyer. And he, in an effort not to pay our members what they were owed, he tried to belittle their contribution to the event for which they had performed.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped him and I said, those musicians, first of all, your client thought that what they were brought to the table was valuable because they hired them to do it, number one. But number two, those musicians have spent many more years preparing for their career than you spent in law school. That was pretty much the end of that Zoom meeting, as I recall. And the next thing we heard was a check for the full amount. So, the truth is what we do, it's magic.
Yeah.
And people who put artists out on the street are not only disrespectful, they're foolish because they can't replace them.
I think the attempt is there, though, right?
I know. I
Like,
just
we
thought it
have-
was funny. I just thought it was. I mean, I walked on your picket line, and I remember thinking, what do these people think? Who do they think they're going to hire to write a script? What do you think they're going to put an ad on Craigslist? Need a great script for a pilot? I mean,
Well, that's what we're talking about, really, is the attempt of the bosses trying to belittle and do on their own the labor of individuals
of
that are
course. I
skilled
mean,
and study for
they're
years.
answering to stockholders, and stockholders just want to know, how much did you make me? They're not, not how many great films did you make. They want to know, how much money did you make? And that's the problem, is all of us in this room are sitting at the intersection of art and money.
And technology, I don't think, is the enemy in and of itself. I think technology, in a lot of ways, has revolutionized the film and television industry, and it's revolutionized music as well. But it's the attempt to use it to get rid of jobs, to pay people less money, to belittle the work itself that is the true offense there. It's the way that the tech is utilized by people in positions of power that has to be combated and monitored in order to prevent people from losing their livelihoods.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, art will always win. Art will always win.
Yeah.
Because we have that power.
What's next for AFM Local 47? What's coming down
Well,
the
we
pipe?
have other national. We always have lots of local. So we have a kind of an unusual structure. We have, half a dozen or so national contracts that are negotiated on the national level, like the one that just occurred.
Okay.
We have maybe 30 or 40 local contracts that are all live performance. For instance, Los Angeles Philharmonic, Los Angeles Opera, Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. And those are always ongoing. All the theaters, the Amundsen, the Pantages, they're, something's always coming due. So I usually do all of those. So that's always happening. But we're preparing for another national contract campaign for live television, a videotape that would cover all the award shows, The Voice, Dance with the Stars, everything like that, the late night talk shows that have bands. So we're preparing for that.
Okay. And is it with the same
No.
entity?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
We're kind of coming at the problems for modern day musicians from almost every angle. And there's a lot of problems. This is as I said earlier, this is an ancient art form, and we're trying to practice it in 2024.
Yeah.
As are you.
Right. True. What can people do? What can a WGA member, an IATSE member, or a person that loves music do to support AFM?
I think what we're already doing. We're already creating. My dream is a second golden age of Hollywood. That's really my dream. Is that we make film and television in the way that it once was. I don't mean necessarily the studio system in terms of contract actors, but the idea that Hollywood really is the center of this art form for the whole world. Hollywood is still magic all over the world, and to the degree that your union, that IATSE, that Teamsters 399, that everyone says we are the creators of this magical product, and we stick together and we stand together. And I am absolutely certain that one of the reasons that our negotiations went so smoothly was from the support of your union, from SAG-AFTRA, from the Teamsters. It was phenomenal what we were. But it wasn't just, oh boy, that's great, they're sticking up for us and we're going to get a good deal. It was this feeling that we were truly together in what we create. Because if really, how can I say this? If we're not thinking about what we're creating, then what are we doing? Then we're just phoning it in. After that evening that I told you about, when we got the agreement, one of the things I said to a friend who is on the other side later, I said, we make art together. And they said, well, it's commercial art. And I said, it's still art.
Yeah. Yeah, and every piece of that, every like second of a beautiful song or every scene of a film or a television show is consumed by everyday working class people who are looking to art to like live vicariously or go on adventures or learn more about the world. And so without like that connection and like that connection between the Hollywood unions, but also like Unite Here that just got their contract that was out on the picket lines with us. There's no reason to do any of this work. So I think it's a beautiful testament to the fact that when people stand together, we can achieve things for our own greater good.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that this coalition of entertainment unions, who are essentially, as we established, artisans, we also have a responsibility to help the labor that is not part of making film. We are part, so if we have this coalition, but we're part of this larger organized labor community, and I think it's very important that we also maintain our ties with them. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing that I think has happened in the last 50 years, or even less in this country, is you now have professions with organized labor that or organized as labor that you would never have expected, like airplane pilots, doctors. Did you ever think that there would be a union of doctors, of emergency room doctors? When I was a little girl, nurses weren't in unions. There were no nurses unions. Teachers weren't in unions. There were auto workers were in unions, and certain construction trades were in unions, but you did not have teachers unions. Well, you're now people are starting to realize is what you said, that when you stand together, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And so now you have professions where it's unexpected. Flight attendants who are treated just abysmally. I mean, nobody even realized how badly they were treated until they started to organize, and we found out. Mm-hmm. And it's atrocious how they're treated. But we also, I think, have a responsibility to the rest of the labor community to be there for them.
Good. I think that's the perfect note to end on. Just the idea of thinking about the lineage of labor and the like tactics and history that we can share with each other, and like what you said, like we kind of stand on the shoulders of UAW and
Absolutely.
and UTLA and these people that have been in it, in the paint from like the dawn of time and making noise, and teaching us how to do it so that we can like carry that tradition forward and make a stronger united front together. So I'm super excited for AFM and like everything that's to come.
I'm excited for what we're going to do in the next 50 years.
Yeah. 50-year plan. Forget about a 5-year plan.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was AFM Local 47 President Stephanie O'Keefe with WGA West member Jazz Peck. Next up, Aaron Fullerton speaks with the Murder at the End of the World co-creator and showrunner, Brit Marling.
Today on the podcast, we have an incredible writer, actress, director, essayist, producer, who wears many hats, and recent Writers Guild nominee. Congratulations. It is Brit Marling, who co-created Murder at the End of the World, also has co-created The OA, as well as several features from Sound of My Voice and The East and After and Another Earth. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Brit.
Oh, Aaron, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I want to just start with a kind of, I guess, philosophical question in some ways about your creative approach. As someone who's a fan and has seen all your material, it feels like there is something that really stands out and unites all of the material, which is that it explores big concepts and ideas, but from a very emotional and human place. It feels like everything is always very much rooted in the human psyche and in heart, but also while exploring really big ideas about the nature of everything from reality to the nature of control. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why that kind of that balance has really has always struck you, and why you and your co-writer Zal Bot
Yeah,
Monglich
yeah.
have chased that so many times.
Gosh, that's a really good question. It's funny because I think in the beginning you do a lot of this really unconsciously. And then later, after you make a few things, people start to tell you, like, "Hey, do you know that you're doing this?" And you're like, "Oh, am I?" And then you kind of look back and you're like, "Yeah, I can see that." I guess, I guess in the beginning, those were maybe the stories that I was drawn to. I always liked science fiction or kind of like lo-fi fantasy, but it I would get turned off when it felt like it was too sterile or clinical. Too much like you're opening a sci-fi book and there's a list of terms and a glossary and like all these things you have to learn to try to grasp the world. And I never felt like I could enter those books. But when the story was emotionally told, as much as it was fantastical or another world you're sort of entering into, then I really compelled. And I think early authors that really moved me, Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which is such a profound and prophetic book. I mean, she wrote that in the 90s, and I feel like we're living that reality that she wrote basically now. But also very emotional story. I think the same of a lot of Ursula Le Guin's work. I'm thinking right now of the short stories she wrote, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, I believe is called, which is such a nifty parable and such an incredible um, dissection of like late capitalism, basically. But it never says those words out loud. It just is a parable about other things and an emotional story. So yeah, I guess I've always been interested in the way in which science fiction or high concept fiction can put another lens on reality to allow you to see it in a way that you've maybe become desensitized to in your day-to-day life. So you invent the idea of another earth in the sky and about communications with a possible double, and suddenly what you can actually look at more deeply is just a small human relationship between two people who both long to have lived their lives a little differently than they did. And so the high concept premise is really just there to give you a kind of deeper cut on what is a very small, human story, actually. So Zal and I have both been drawn to those kinds of stories for many years. Hopefully each time we get a little better at learning how to both set up a high concept world and then tell something that feels just human and grounded inside it. But I don't know. I leave that for the audience to
Yeah,
decide
well, I
whether
think you've
they're
been
evolving
consistently
or
think you've been consistently pretty great at it. And in the most recent project, Murder at the End of the World, you get to kind of take on a new genre you haven't played in before either, which is murder mystery.
yeah.
Not that you still, human connection and emotion are still, I say emotion. What I really mean to is in a lack of fear of great character work and big emotions, which I think sometimes doesn't necessarily permeate these genres.
Yeah.
And so it's so refreshing to see it there. But you still have some of the touches that I feel are kind of your signature touches, but also overlapped onto a genre you haven't played in before. What was the impetus for attacking the murder mystery genre, and what was the excitement, and what was the nerves going into it?
Oh, a lot of nerves. Always when trying to do a new genre, a lot of nerves. But I think also a lot of excitement, as you said, because I think it was really around the time that we were doing the second season of the OA that we started to think of the idea of doing a who done it. Um, Zal came one day to one of our writing sessions and was like, "Did you know that the who done it rose to popularity between the First and the Second World War?" Because that was also a time when everyone was kind of looking around and being like, "Okay, who done it? Like, how did we get to this place?" And of course those stories were often set in an English sort of country manner because that was the seat of power at that time. Certainly probably the new seat of power of our time is Silicon Valley and the ideas and thinkers that are coming out of that place and the technology that they're inventing that's shaping how all of us think and interact and engage. And so those were like some of the early feelings there. It was like, oh, is there a way to do a whodunit that feels grounded and real rather than sort of tongue in cheek, Nancy Drew? How can we make something that feels really believable? And then inside that, instead of getting cerebral and cold, can we stay like hot-blooded and visceral? One of the things that I think is, you know, a tenet of the genre is the detective tends to not know the victim, and that kind of remove is part of what makes it a puzzle, an intellectual puzzle to solve. And so we felt like actually in this, we want to try to do something where the detective is a young woman and where she knows the victim really well. And that exploration of how he may have met his untimely death sends her back into the past to analyze, you know, the first time they fell in love. And so all those feelings of first love and shaping yourself and coming of age and first loss, you know, come together in a pretty potent cocktail, hopefully, and make a kind of for a hot-blooded mystery rather than a cold-blooded one. So that was the aim, and certainly we drew a lot of inspiration from, I mean, all the great mysteries of all time. I mean, I think we've watched Chinatown, you know, dozens of times. It's so immaculately constructed and manages to be very emotional and still prescient, you know, still about something, which is, you know, about what happens to people who have um, limitless power and how that both affects the shape of the earth, you know, like in Chinatown, what's happening to water, how is water being controlled, and then also interpersonal relationships and how a man like Noah Cross is both, you know, raping the earth and raping people in his family at the same time. That narrative, that idea, that kernel of truth has only become more true potentially. And so I think we looked at, you know, works like that and we're like, okay, like how can we put a big ideas at the center of this thing about I don't know, the nature of what's afoot right now. So
Yeah.
tech in Silicon Valley sort of seemed like the place to, you know, to talk about.
Well, and it certainly is an incredible sandbox for a story like this too. You have hackers and coders and inventors, and all kinds of interesting creative thinkers, artists, and it also gives you a chance to tell some of the mystery in exciting new ways as well, without any kind of spoilers. You know, AI plays a large role in the story, and it's, speaking of prescience, even I'm wondering just like what how that was to approach it. I noticed even just in like during the course of production and from to when it aired, there were leaps and bounds in AI that by the time it aired, some of the things that may have been fantasy when you wrote them were suddenly reality by the time it aired. I think of the scene where the AI is writing Harry Potter in the style of Hemingway, which is like we're all doing that on ChatGPT now. You know, it's crazy.
It's so, Aaron, it's so crazy because when we came up with the idea 5 years ago and we were like leaning towards AI, we would talk to a lot of our friends in Silicon Valley and we'd be like, we want to do this thing. We want to, you know, we want to do a tech billionaire, but we want him to be interested in artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence and have this cool AI assistant. And it's fun because the guests can all interact with it. And people were like, oh, that's really a long way away. Like, that's so far off. And these are people within the industry that were like encouraging us to do something else. They were like, do space, you know, have him be interested in space. And so at first we were like cooking on this whole like Mars plot. And then we were like, no, but we're really drawn to AI and it feels like it's closer than we realize. And then obviously we wrote scenes to try to articulate to the audience who knew nothing about this at the time, like what is a large language model, how does it function, you know, how does it take everything that's ever been written and like, you know, create an algorithm out of that and then, you know, write something that is basically a derivative of every narrative that's become before. You know, we felt we had to explain all these things. Of course, by the time we were in the edit, you know, Chat GPT was released and people were, you know, starting to write novels with AI. And it felt like we were just like coming in with this story right at the right time. And if we'd been any later, it would have been like old news, you know, to be talking about this stuff. But yeah, I find it really fascinating. And I think obviously the writers strike and the actors strike. And I think we're all asking ourselves now really challenging questions about like what is the nature of creativity and what does it mean to come up with original ideas and what does it mean to use AI as part of that and what does it like portend for the future of like writing that is human authored and writing that is, you know, computer generated, you know, or AI authoring. And so yeah, I'm still asking myself a lot of questions on this subject. I could talk about that endlessly.
Yes. Well, and then, you know, once you get into the world of at what point is what point can AI participate in potentially criminal behavior? You get a whole new subset of moral quandaries. Uh,
Completely. Completely.
um, yeah. Um, it's interesting. You were just using the term hot-blooded quite a bit to describe a lot of the characters and the scenarios, and yet your characters are constantly in Murder at the End of the World, trying not to freeze to death because you've placed them at the end of the world. Um, I wanted to this, it is not quite a locked room thriller, but in some ways it had that feeling, especially in the present day timeline,
Yes.
because this hotel at the end of the world really does become kind of, in some ways, like you know a manor in an Agatha Christie novel. In some
Yeah.
ways, yeah,
Yeah.
you're waiting for someone to pull the right sconce and flip the bookcase around. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the choice of that location and what the ways you built it, the way you found it, and what you really needed from it, and how it was going to be kind of, in many ways, a character in the story.
Completely a character in the story. It's funny. We always knew we wanted it to be in a kind of Scandinavian, remote, frozen landscape, because we knew we wanted to cut back and forth between that and the desert of the American West as the past, and that sort of Badlands-esque road trip that Darby and Bill take together, where they fall in love, and they fall in love while they're hunting, the cold case of a serial killer, which is a kind of interesting contrast. And we wanted to go cut between the warmth and the vast landscapes of the desert, which is also treeless, big winds, to these like frozen tundras. And that hot cold thing was really important. We'd initially thought Norway, and then one of the production executives at FX was like, "Have you ever thought about Iceland? They have this great tax incentive." And we were like, "Oh, we don't want to go someplace just because tax." But then we went to Iceland, and there's an incredible company there, True North, run by Leifur Dagfuson. And the moment we landed with that group, they're an incredible group of Icelandic producers and filmmakers. We went around the whole continent, and the things that we saw, like the adventures that we went on. I mean, we were trekking across glaciers and going through ice caves and rappelling into Basalt Canyon. It was an adventure of a lifetime. And so we went back and wrote a lot of those places into the script,
I,
and it had this extreme quality to it, to the making of it. And I think that hopefully that entered the story as well, and you feel like this hotel really is in a remote location, and Andy, the tech billionaire who has built it, is thinking about geothermal energy and thinking about fresh water and thinking about a place to have his family for his sort of end of days mentality, which I think is a very dangerous mentality. And so that initial hotel that you see in the beginning, which seems so luxurious and exciting and beautifully made, then it starts to feel a little like a prison, and then when you descend inside it later, not to reveal too much, you realize like, okay, wait, actually this thing is a fortress, and actually it's hiding a lot of things in this fortress in the middle of nowhere. And so yeah, you're so right to say that the hotel and the location is really a character unto itself in this. And I've never felt that to this degree making something before, how much location, um, and the sets that Alex DiGirolando built, and the way that Charlotta Bruce Christensen shot them, really felt like another character, like another guest on the retreat, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. The specificity of the production design really comes through. And as for the storms, the storms, everything going on outside the hotel, you achieved adrenaline envy from the audience. At least for me, I was. It made me want to,
That's
go
really
spelunking somewhere remote.
That's
Yeah.
really sweet.
It,
When we were sitting at the premiere, some friends of ours were sitting next to us, and they had just been to Iceland, and at the end, my friend like hit his partner and was like, "I can't believe we were just in Iceland and we didn't stay at that hotel." And I was like, "Oh, guys, that hotel is not real. Like, it's a VFX hotel with some locations in Iceland, and was actually just built, sound stages in New Jersey, sandwiched between a recycling dump and the expressway." And their minds were blown. Like, they couldn't believe it wasn't actually a place. So I felt like we really achieved with something with that we managed to convince some people it really exists in the real world.
Absolutely. So you and Zal have a long working relationship, co-created and co-written several things together. And now with Murder at the End of the World, You both of you take chances. Both of you direct it at certain
Yeah.
points, direct
Mhm.
different episodes. Co-created, and of course, you perform in it as well. When you start to assemble kind of your team, especially when you get other writers involved, what are you looking for? Since you're so hands-on in so many departments, what are those other voices that you're looking for when you kind of put a room together and trying to build that creative team? How does that work for you guys?
It's funny because Zal and I, in a very embarrassing way, didn't have any TV experience when we came to make TV. And we were thinking of TV as a space in which to basically tell novels, just long format stories. And so when we went to make the OA, we talked about our friend Melanie Marnick earlier. I think she was like, what? Because I had read a play that she wrote, this beautiful play about insomnia, which is something she had experienced. And we called her up and we had lunch together. And I was like, do you want to come make this TV series with us? And she was like, great. Like, what TV have you guys made before? And we were like, nothing. But she was such an amazing, she was such an amazing writer, and she had been in many rooms before, and she helped give a shape to things that we really needed to learn from her, because we were coming from the world of features. So we were just thinking about things with a beginning, middle, and end, and that being 2 hours long. And now we were trying to stretch it out to 7 hours. Um, and so our initial rooms were really small like that, because I think we were worried if we had too many people from the traditional system that we wouldn't be able to be as form breaking as we wanted to be. And so our room for OA, for instance, was like, 5 people. It was Melanie and Dominic Orlando, who's recently passed, an amazing writer, and Ruby Ray Spiegel. And it was just the 5 of us. And I think that smallness really was potent towards making something that felt authored in a cohesive way. On A Murder at the End of the World, we were writing during the pandemic, which was really challenging. And so Zal and I had sort of broken out the world and the arc of the beginning, middle, and end of the story, and written kind of a short story novella kind of version of it, which we shared with FX. And then when we were pulling together a room, we were trying to really think about who has expertise in different areas that will make this braid work well. Like who's got some experience in writing murder mysteries, but then who's got experience in telling a really deep cut emotional love story, and who doesn't have any experience writing for television, who's going to come from a completely different perspective. Rebecca Roanhorse, for instance, is an amazing science fiction writer whose work I've admired for years, and it was her first time in a writer's room. Sherry
Wow.
Dimeline, also amazing science fiction writer, her first time in the room. And then there were people who've written a lot of things, like Nikki Paluga or Melanie Marnick. And I think that energy of taking in new voices who are learning to write for the screen for the first time, and veterans, and bringing that together, I think was a really potent cocktail. Of course, it was so challenging to do all of that on Zoom. Like, I much prefer in person because really the Holy Ghost is missing when you're, dealing with the flatness of screens. But we did the best we could inside that period. And I think we managed to carve out a pretty good story together. So
I think so. Yeah. I alluded to it earlier, but this is also your first time, probably, I don't think your first time directing ever, but your first time directing for television. Is that right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And how was that, jumping into that deep end?
it was awesome. I studied economics and photography in school, so in some ways it felt like I was coming full circle to what I had done before, or a merger of what I'd done before, which is like thinking of shooting images and thinking of communicating in an economy of those images, I guess. But I had directed a documentary really early on when I was like 19. I co-directed a documentary with a great filmmaker, Mike Cahill, called Boxers and Ballerinas, that we shot in Havana. And that directing documentaries is amazing, because you've got to just lend yourself to like what exists and try to capture it in a way and cut it in a way, really, for me, making a documentary, it's all in the edit. It's like, what are you going to take from this huge pile of footage to carve out a narrative? But this was my first time directing something fiction work, and uh, it was fantastic for me, because I think a lot of times, I think people used to read our scripts and say that they were really visually evocative, like you could see what was on the page. And it was nice to take that extra step towards deeply realizing it. For instance, Charlotta Bruce Christensen is a DP I've long admired. She shot A Quiet Place, and she also shot Far From the Madding Crowd. And I remember watching those two films and not knowing who the DP was, but thinking that the treatment of the light, the sensitivity to light in them was the same, which is a weird thing to think about things that are very different genres.
Yeah,
Um,
but they also have a lot of texture too. Yeah.
well, so much texture
Yeah.
and a suturing to the female lead. And I was like, why does it feel like the camera is always in the place that the woman's gaze would be? Like, how is this happening? And then I looked them up. I realized the film had the same uh, director of photography behind it, and it was Charlotta. And I called her up, and what an amazing person she was to work with. And we were so in the trenches together. Every Sunday we would be shot listing. We would go through these marathon weeks with each other. It's very hard to make something this ambitious on a TV budget, on a TV timetable. And so getting, I think, to kind of close the gap a little between what had been in my mind's eye and what ends up on screen was a really beautiful experience. And of course, Zal and I have been working together for years. So much of what we're both seeing when we come up with a story together is a kind of shared imagination. So I directed the pilot, and then he directed the second episode, and we sort of passed the baton back and forth to each other to spell each other out as we tried to make it through this marathon of shooting in Iceland in the dead of winter, and then shooting, in Utah in the desert in the height of summer. It was quite a physically intense experience.
I would be remiss if I didn't also ask some questions about the OA, which I think most people know as a cult hit, of which I am a proud cult member.
Oh,
I would love to hear just a little bit about. I remember thinking after watching the pilot, this is so ambitious and so unique. I don't even know what to compare it to. I just remember thinking, this isn't like any TV I've seen. It's not really like any movie I've seen. The only thing I could really think of was it's funny you've mentioned novels and stuff already a few times here, which is the only place my mind could really go to find some analogs. I would love to hear a little bit about the process of not just crafting that world, but then kind of convincing Netflix and Plan B and everyone to really like believe in this vision, because it was a vision that felt so off the wall in such a ultimately I think really profound way. Yeah, so I'd love to hear about that.
That's really nice to hear you say that. Yeah, I think part of it came from, we never thought Netflix would be interested in it. I remember when our agent was like, "Well, we'll talk to HBO, and then we'll talk to Netflix, we'll talk to Amazon." We were like, Netflix is so blue chip, what are they going to want to make something like this for?" But Zal and I, for lack of knowing any better, we did the pitch in this very unusual way. Like we did the pitch the same way we come up with stories together when we're alone in a room, which is we act it out, and we just like grab, whatever props are around, and they like enter the play, and it's like, and you're improvising and you're making up a story orally in real time. And so we had carved out this really rich narrative, because we felt like one of the things that's really sad about Mindbenders is sometimes in television, it's like people throw up an idea for a pilot, and then they're like, we'll figure out how this all comes together 5 seasons later, but they don't know. And you can tell as you're going along that the writers don't know, when they built the labyrinth, they
It's
hadn't figured out what was at the center. So we really spent a lot of time, and we didn't know any better. So we spent this time on our own. It's not like anyone was paying us. We were just like daydreaming this story and writing down, all of the intrigue inside it. And so I think when we went to pitch people, everyone was just like, because it was like we did it like it was a two-man show, basically, two-woman, like we were just doing the play of it, acting out all the parts, grabbing people's handbags and using them as props. And so by the end of it, I think, everyone was like, what? Ted, I used to run into Ted Sarando sometimes, and he'd be like, that's still one of the best pitches I've ever heard. But I think it came from a naivete of us enjoying each other and the story. And so because it had so much energy, I think people look past the strangeness of it, because it had something also at its center that was just a propulsive, good yarn. Like Shahrazad just weaving a tale that was going to every night keep her alive, and not have the king kill her because she just manages to whip out another good story. I think from that oral pitch is really how it came to be. And then because it was Zal and I together, and because I was playing the lead, we were really able to keep it small, and it had this big ideas, but like a self-contained energy. And Plan B, they were incredible partners at that time. Sarah Esberg, Dee Dee Gardner, and Jeremy Kleiner, all of them were, very invested in the scripts, very invested in the edit, and we would comb through cuts again and again, because I think when you are making something strange, something deeply from inside, something that, as you said, isn't borrowing that much from other film and television, but is kind of um, trying to really get outside the box. I think then you have to work harder to round out some of the rough edges so people can just digest its newness or its strangeness.
Mhm.
And so, and this is also a credit to Plan B and to Cindy Holland at Netflix and to everybody at Netflix. They really created a bit of a force field around the project. They let it be what it was. We never
Mhm.
got notes from Netflix being like, make this feel more traditional, or make this, feel more like a horror, or this, or they really let it be its own unique child. And I think, yeah, I think in the end, it's been very moving, the number of showrunners who have come up to me, or the number of novelists or filmmakers who have come up to me and said, like, wow, the OA just really changed what I felt was even possible in a story, or really the permission you could give yourself to tell something pretty wild and manage to get away with it. So, or
Yeah,
at least
yeah,
get away with it for a while, and then the business really changed. And um, of course, there were a lot of things at Netflix in that era that met, you know, met with the cutting room floor. But it had a very big audience. Actually, it's funny because people describe it often as being a cult show, but it had for that time at Netflix, it had a really wide wide viewership. I think people were hungry to watch a story that wanted to talk about spirit, and like a kind of spiritual insurrection, and the invisible. And um yeah, it was, I feel very proud of that story. The more that time passes, the more proud I feel of how we managed to make something so far outside the box.
yeah, and for 2 seasons too,
And for 2 seasons.
to get a second season too, that didn't quite not reset things, but in some ways, certainly decided to tell the story from an entirely new direction with a lot of new characters.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, again, just as ambitious, it felt like both a sequel and a new wild interpretation. So it was I would love a season 3, especially with that mind bender ending we got at the end of season 2. But I know that the tides of creative freedom rise and fall, and
They really do. Those doors open and then they sometimes shut. But it's funny. Grimes is a musician I really admire, have admired for years, because she authors all her work. She writes it all, she produces it all, she's making it all. And she had been a fan of OA. And I remember her telling me once at the end of the second season, she's like, I know people want a third season, and I know you guys had it all mapped out. And she's like, but I think actually ending at that end of season 2 was very powerful, because it went meta, and it was an invitation to begin to then think meta, and of stories having a kind of meta consciousness. Yeah, so sometimes whenever I feel like, oh man, I wish we could have kept going, I keep in mind what she said about that, because maybe in some ways that was a fitting end for the story. We'll see, time will
yeah.
tell.
Yeah, I mean, I like that intro. I'll digest the Grimes' perspective, and
Yeah,
yeah,
just chew
maybe
on it a
that'll
little, see what
become
you
more at peace with the cancellation. Yeah.
think.
You've now, as we kind of wrap this up, first of all, congrats again on the Writers Guild nomination. Very exciting, and good luck in April. But before we end, you've already mentioned some of the influences for Murder at the End of the World, like going back to the whodunits, and but also even Octavia Butler, and I even in your Criterion collection videos, you talked about Pacula, and some of these directors and storytellers who have had influence on you. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about both for whether it's Murder at the End of the World, the OA, or even your features. Are there influences you continue to go back to, or ones that you've just recently discovered that are helping, either helping you or exciting you in terms of the influence on your own creative perspective and ambitions?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, I think one I return to a lot. Um, I returned to Kieslowski's work a lot. He made Red, White, and Blue, and also The
Mm,
Double Life of Veronique. And obviously, we were so moved by Aaron Jacob's performance in Red and The Double Life of Veronique that we asked her to join us on the second season of OA, and we were so floored when she said yes. I mean, it was like a big moment for me to get to work with an actress who made me want to become an actress. You
uh,
know, when I was
yeah.
studying economics at Georgetown, like it had never even occurred to me I could do this. And I remember watching Red and thinking that I was like, oh, this woman isn't just acting. She's doing something else. Like she's channeling something. She's like letting something come through her. Um, and so it was amazing to get to work with somebody that like made you drawn to the profession. So I go back to Kozlowski's work a lot because I think he had this amazing way of talking about the invisible or the ineffable, for lack of any better language, but keeping it grounded in the mundane world, not,
Mhm.
you know, angels with celestial wings and, fantasy sort of capital F, but more like what is magical or what is holy or what is wild and alive, even at the box superstore, even when you're at
Mhm.
Best Buy. Is there anything holy? Is there something, sublime to be found in some of these spaces that, the box store is sort of like hamlets off the freeway? And
Yeah.
I think OA was born a lot from that, an interest, a shared interest Zal and I had about trying to find that sense of like insurrection.
Mhm.
And
A
so I go back to
cul-de-sac in suburban Missouri. Yeah.
100%. And
Yeah.
I think for Murder at the End of the World, we were gravitating a lot too towards, and this is how I think Clive Owen entered the picture, is we were big fans of Gosford Park, and
Hmm.
loved the idea of like Gosford Park, the ending to that movie had a lot to say about class and gender and lives and how they, are built or unravel. And so I think we were really inspired by that and thinking about how could we make a whodunit that had something to say and like that had teeth, and
Mhm.
was provocative. Not just like a cute or neat answer, like, oh, I couldn't have thought of that, but more like something that unpacked in you days later and made you feel like, oh, what is that? Um, yeah. And then I also I try always to just be taking in new things. Something that I saw recently that hasn't left me is the film Afterlife. Really stuck with me because again, it's like an exploration of the spiritual, but in a kind of mundane setting. And I go back to Lynch's work a lot. I mean, Twin Peaks. I think the first season of Twin Peaks is just like an incredible. Speaking of novelistic, or watching
Uh-huh.
something, and as
Yep.
you're watching it, being like, I do not know what this is like. It is not like anything else.
Uh-huh.
I think that feeling and that permission that Lynch seems to give himself and invite other filmmakers toward, which is to like let, the deep unconscious thoughts come up from the back, and
Mhm.
not, don't try to analyze them too much, just put them out there and see who they speak to. Yeah, so those are some of them. Of course, once we get off this conversation, there'll be like 10 other things that I'll be like, why didn't I should have brought this up with Aaron, but
Well, you can post them somewhere, and we'll all. And then you can do another Criterion video.
okay, great.
Uh, yeah.
Maybe we'll have like
But yeah. Well, I'm gonna go rewatch Gosford Park, among other things at the moment. Um, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for opening up about Murder at the End of the World, the OA, and your process. It was so great to hear about everything. And again, congrats on the success of the show, on the Writers Guild nomination, and we wish you luck.
Gosh, thank you. Thanks so much, Aaron. This has been such a nice conversation. Thanks for having it with me.
I feel the same. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Third and Fairfax. You can listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, and Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. Also check out writtenby.com, the Guild's online publication, for more on writer craft, career, and union life. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.